This video is over lesson 71, finding the whole group when a fraction is known. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start by taking a look at an example. 2/3 of the class are girls. There are 18 girls. How many students are in the class? So, ladies and gentlemen, there are two different ways that we're going to look at solving this. The first way is going to be to solve with a diagram, which is what our book intends. And then the second way I'm going to show you how to solve this is another thing that the book is going to ask you to do from time to time, which, to be honest with you, is going to be my favorite way to solve it because it's getting you more prepared for algebra. So the book is going to ask for both, but my preference is the second one. So here we go. To solve with a diagram, first, we have to set it up. So we're going to make a rectangle and split it up based on the fraction in the problem. So the fraction here was 2/3, so that means we're going to break it up into thirds. So I'm going to make a rectangle, and on my paper, this would be 3 spaces long. So when you do this on line paper, you'd make this 3 spaces big, so it makes it nice and easy. And then we are going to group together 2 of these. So that way, if I have 2 of these grouped together, I can see now that this is 2/3. These 2 rows right here are 2 of the total thirds of this rectangle. On the other side, I'm also going to group this together because the problem told me that there are 18 girls. So I know that these 2/3 must be 18 girls. And now we're going to kind of work backwards, and we're going to end up figuring out what is the total, which will go on top of our box there. So if 2 groups makes 18, that means that each group, well, 18 divided by 2, each group must be 9 students. Well, if those 2 groups are 9 students, it means that all 3 groups must be 9 students, which therefore now, 9 times 3, there must be 27 students in the class. So once again, just to go through this, if we use a diagram, we're going to start with my 2/3. And so I will make a box that I can split up into thirds and then group 2 of those thirds together. And on one side, I'm going to label that as 2/3. On the other side, I'm going to label that as what I know that 2/3 is. So I know the 2/3 is 18 students. Split that 18 up into 2 equal groups, so 9 and 9. And therefore, if this is a 9, that's a 9. That must be a 9. And then all together then must be 27. If I want to solve this then with an equation, we have to go back to one of our previous lessons where we talked about this, and we're going to follow the formula. So we know a fraction of the whole is a part of the whole. We're going to translate this into mathematics. So a fraction then is going to be some number. We will represent that with the letter F here. Of almost always means times, and this is not an exception to that, so it's going to mean times. The whole thing we're going to represent with W, that'll be some number. Is, remember is and are, was, were, those to be verbs from English class mean equals. And then a part of the whole, we'll go with lowercase p because it's a part. So capital W because it's the whole thing, p because it's a part of it. So that's my formula. That's my formula. So if we take our example and plug that in, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write the equation. So our fraction, in this case, was 2/3. So you'll notice I made these lines, so think of this like your lined paper. So I'm going to write neatly between the lines 2/3. Of is times, and then do we know the whole thing in this case? Well, no, I don't know the whole class. That's what I'm trying to figure out is how many are in the class, the whole class. So we could go W here, or you could go more traditional and make it X. We could make it C for class. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go X just to make it kind of traditional. So 2/3 of that unknown whole class equals the part. And we know the part that's 2/3 is 18 girls. That's my first step, is to write my equation. The second step is we want to solve this. And we're going to solve this by multiplying both sides by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2/3. In order to show that, though, I'm going to start actually by copying this down. And then on both sides of my equation, I'm going to put a times dot, and then the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. So 3/2 times 2/3, those are reciprocals, which means that'll be 1. Anytime you multiply reciprocals together, that'll make 1. And of course, 1 times x, well, 1 times anything is itself. So 1 times x is just x. So the last step is we're going to simplify this. Over here, I'm going to teach you a little shortcut. When I have a whole number and I multiply it with a fraction, so a fraction has a numerator and a denominator, then what's going to happen here is that this is going to equal the whole number times the numerator divided by the denominator. Or it will equal the whole number divided by the denominator and then multiply the result by the numerator. So what you see here is it doesn't really matter what order we do these in, as long as you realize that you've got to divide by the denominator and multiply by the numerator. So if I take a look here, I'm going to say 18 divided by 2 sounds nice and easy. 18 divided by 2 would be 9, times 3 would be 27. So there must be 27 students in the class. So once again, to go over how we got all this, first step we wrote the equation following the formula. So my fraction was 2/3 times, I didn't know the whole thing, so we needed some variable, equals the part of the class that is the 2/3. Well, that was 18 girls, 18 students. Second step was to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So if we flip 2/3 over, we get 3/2 on both sides there. These guys canceled each other out. That's why there was just an x. But then over here, we divide by the 2, we times by the 3. Now you could have done this the other way around. Could have done 18 times 3 was 54. Divided by 2 is 27 still. But I think it's easier to start with that division. 18 divided by 2 is nice and easy. So with those basics set, we're going to do a few more here. We're going to take a look at the practice problems from your book. So please go ahead and find your book and open up to page 504. 504. 504. Practice problems for lesson 71. And here we go. So for A through C, it says draw a diagram to solve the problems. We are actually going to draw a diagram for those, but we're also going to make the equations. We're going to practice both methods. We'll start with the diagram, though. So A says 3/5 of the students. Stop right there. I don't even have to read anything else here. I know 3/5. So I'm going to leave a space up here for the total, but below it, I'm going to start by making a rectangle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces down, and then I'll make my rectangle. And so because I went 5 spaces down, that means that I can use the blue lines on my paper to very easily make fifths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are all fifths now. And it's saying 3/5. So I'm going to use my brace here. So it looks like a set of parentheses, 2 parentheses with an arrowhead in between them, to label this as 3/5. So these 3 together are 3/5 of the whole thing. Okay, now with that set, let's keep reading. So 3/5 of the students in the class are boys. Okay, so that's a certain number of boys. If there are 15 boys in the class, so I know from that right there that there are 15 boys. 3/5 of the class is 15 boys. So with that being said, well, if this is 3 groups makes 15, well, 15 divided by 3, there must be 5 in each one of these groups. So the question then is, how many students are there in all? Well, if each one of these is 5, then these two must also be 5. And then, well, 5 groups of 5 is 25. 25 what, though? Well, these are all students. 25 students in the class. So that's the diagram. For the equation, I'm going to start with the fraction. We know the fraction is 3/5 times, I do not know how many students are in the class. I don't know the whole thing. But I do know that 3/5 of the class are my 15 boys. Step 2, I'm going to copy that down. And then we multiply both sides by the reciprocal. Now, if you want to, you can kind of go like this, because the 5 and the 5 will cancel, the 3 and the 3 will cancel. If that kind of helps you visually to see that that's gone, you could do that. So the reciprocals are going to cancel each other out. They'll become 1, and that 1, well, 1 times anything, the 1 just disappears, basically. So that'll leave me with just x. On the other side, I'm also going to have a 5/3. So multiply this side by 5/3, multiply that side by 5/3. So remember, as you look at this, you've got to think about it as we are dividing by the 3 and we are multiplying by the 5. So that's in red pen there. We are dividing by the 3, we are multiplying by the 5. Well, 15 divided by 3 is 5, times 5 is 25 students. Same answer either way. Let's look at B. 5/8 of the clowns had happy faces. All right, I'm going to stop right there. 5/8 of the clown had happy faces. So I'm going to make a box, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that I can split up into eighths easily. So 8 spaces on my paper means that I can make a box that is easily split up into 8 equal sections. So there's my eighths, and the fraction said 5/8. So I'm going to group together 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these and label it as 5/8. Now just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. Okay. So that's 5/8. Now this tells me that 15 clowns did not have happy faces. So remember, my 5/8 were the number that had happy faces. So then it switches up on me and says 15 did not have happy faces. So this should be the number right here of all the clowns that had happy faces. But then the problem switches it up on me and tells me that there are 15 without happy faces. So there are 15 clowns that don't have happy faces. Well, of course, if this is 5/8, then what remains down there must be 3/8. So we can still use this to figure out the answer. So 15 clowns then in 3 groups. Well, that's kind of like what we did above, right? 15 in 3 groups. So that means that each of these must be 5 again. So 3 groups of 5 makes 15. Well, if those are 5s, that means that all of these are 5s as well. Okay. So let's keep reading then. How many clowns were there in all? Well, it's asking for the whole thing. So that means I have 8 groups of 5. Well, 8 times 5 is 40 clowns. For the equation, we're going to do things a little bit differently though. So for writing our equation, I know that there are 15 clowns that do not have happy faces. So when I write my equation, my fraction, what my fraction is talking about needs to match what this part is talking about. So if this is talking about the part that do not have happy faces, then my fraction has to be the fraction that do not have happy faces. So, well, if 5/8 have happy faces, then 3/8 must not have happy faces. And then we don't know the total, so that'll still be times x. So that's the one catch with the equation, is that whatever this fraction is talking about has to be the same as what this part is talking about. Second step, I'm going to copy this down. I'm going to put a times down on both sides, and then multiply by the reciprocal of 3/8. So flip 3/8 over, and I get 8/3 on both sides. So on the left, 8 and 8 will cancel, 3 and 3 will cancel, that's why it's just x. Over here, 15 divided by the 3 is 5, times 8 is 40. So there are 40 clowns in all. And then finally, letter C. Letter C. Vincent was chagrined when he looked at the clock, for in 3/4 of an hour he had only answered 12 homework questions. All right, well, right there, that tells us two important pieces of information. So first of all, my fraction is 3/4, which means that my box here will be 4 spaces, so that I can easily break that up into fourths. And then it also tells me that we're putting together 3 of those, so I'll have 3/4. And it even tells me in that sentence what that 3/4 is. That 3/4 is 12 homework questions, or 12 questions. So if 3 groups makes 12, 12 divided by 3, each group must be 4. So 3 groups of 4 makes 12. Well, if each one of those is 4, that must be 4 as well. So let's go and actually see what the question's asking. At that rate, how many questions would Vincent answer in 1 hour? So if this is 3/4 of the hour, that means the whole box then is the whole hour. So put the whole thing together. 4 groups of 4 is 16 questions. So at that rate, Vincent will answer 16 questions in the hour. And then finally, letter D. Letter D basically tells us to do what we've already been doing. It tells us to take this problem here from C, but do it as an equation, which is why you see it right there in the equation column. So in this case, my fraction was 3/4. I'm going to actually just write x right after that, because remember, when we have a number and a letter, we don't have to put the dot between it. So I'm going to relax that a little bit and drop the dot out. But we know that 3/4 times the whole thing must be the 12 questions that he's answered in the 3/4 of an hour we have. So now I'm going to copy that down and multiply both sides by the reciprocal of 3/4. So that would be 4/3. 4 and the 4 will cancel, 3 and the 3 will cancel. That leaves me with just x. And then over here, I'm going to divide by 3 and multiply by 4. So 12 divided by 3 is 4, times 4 is 16 questions. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our lesson.